Chapter 25. The Men's Advance Conference at Lake Geneva Christian Center in Alexandria, Minnesota is a great event. I always enjoyed it. But they put my table right next to Vincent Miller. Vincent Miller is an amazing man. He's written 10 books. He started the Resolute program. He filled his table with hats and colorful brochures and cool stuff. Next to his, my table looked bare. Throughout the morning, men stopped by every few minutes to talk with him. These were good, honest Christian men, so most of them didn't stop at my table. They weren't looking for freedom from addiction or someone to visit them in prison. I'll be honest, as the hours passed, I grew envious. Again, I love Vince. He's always encouraging me and offering great ideas, but he was getting all the action. I even had a bowl of candy, but people would sample my candy and go back to talk to Vince. I tried to tell them, hey, that's my bait, but I might as well have been talking to fish for how they listen. It was almost time for the first presentation. My candy supply was dwindling, along with my hopes. I had all but decided this would be my last year buying a table for the conference, when I saw a man walk through the front doors. It took me a second look, but I recognized him. His name was Steve, and we had done time together. Last time I'd seen him, he'd taken the bottom bunk in the annex at St. Cloud State Prison. Steve was the last person I expected to step through that door. He noticed me about 3 seconds after I saw him, and he hurried over with a big smile on his face. We hugged. He told me he had been released from prison 3 days earlier after an 18-year stretch. I was immediately in tears. I showed him my table and told him about my ministry. He was flabbergasted. He kept staring at me, shaking his head. He couldn't believe how much I'd changed. Dennis, he said, I wasn't going to come up here. All the way I'm thinking, what am I doing? A man he didn't know had stopped at his halfway house and invited him to the conference. Steve wasn't sure what led him to do it, but an hour later, he was in his car. As he drove down the highway, he kept thinking, what am I doing? I'm not even Christian. He figured he wouldn't know a single person. More than once, he approached an exit and almost convinced himself to turn around. There were over 700 people at that conference. Steve walked in a stranger, feeling intensely that he didn't belong. The first person he saw was me. As I said before, God brings people together. He makes connections we would never expect or imagine. But it gets even better. The first presentation was starting, so Steve went ahead without me and found an empty seat in the auditorium. The crowd filled in around him. After a couple of minutes, a man shuffled into the empty chair to his left. Steve glanced over and was shocked. It was a man he had done federal time with 12 years earlier. The Holy Spirit had prompted Steve to go to this conference, and he'd argued the whole way, griping to God about how he wouldn't know anyone. Then the first two people Steve ran into were both guys he knew from prison, and both of them had turned their lives around. This is what God does, but it gets even better. At lunch, he started chatting with someone who turned out to be the brother of a man who mentored Steve during time between prison stints. As they were eating their sandwiches, this man offered him a job. At that conference, it was almost unfair. Jesus hit Steve alongside the head with old friends and a job offer. He brought the man to tears. Steve had a profound encounter with the Holy Spirit. The cool thing about God is that I did too. I had let myself get discouraged. I sat staring at my bare table with its disappearing candy and felt sorry for myself. What God did for Steve was a reminder. I did not become a pastor to gain a huge following. I was at that conference for one person, Steve. It's good we have preachers who can connect with stadiums full of people, but that's not my ministry. God did not call me to preach to the masses. I'm called to help the one.